Good afternoon, and welcome to a presentation and panel discussion on smart home technology and its effect on home products, housewares, and the future kitchen. My name is John Jesse, and I'm with the International Housewares Association. We are the organization that puts on the International Home and Houseware Show, and I want to thank you for being here. We are fortunate today to have a group of smart home industry authorities, and on behalf of the International Housewares Association, I want to thank them for lending their expertise. We are also very fortunate to have a leading authority on the future of the Smart Kitchen to moderate today's session. He is the creator of the Smart Kitchen Summit, host of the Smart Kitchen Show podcast, and founder of the connected home research and advisory firm Next Market Insights. Please welcome Mr. Mike Wolf.
Thanks, John. Hey, everyone, thanks for coming. I don't know if we got our PowerPoints going. We got them? We have video. Can we go to the PowerPoint? So thank you for coming. I started the Smart Kitchen Summit, and that's not my presentation. But the idea behind the Smart Kitchen Summit, when I got the idea, I wanted to basically get the people in the room from the food industry, appliance industry, toy inventors like Mike, and say, hey, do we have something here? And so the first year, we had year one, and it was like a get to know you year. Like we got in a room and it was like, hey, there is something here. People like the folks behind the Wemo Crockpot got up there and talked about they were pretty early, they talked about their experiments. But we kind of looked at each other collectively and said, there is an industry here, this is something happening. The next year, 2016 of the Smart Kitchen Summit, things actually started to happen. Partnerships were formed, companies were actually introducing product. I think Heston Q first showed off their product around that time. I think Tavala also showed off their product at the Startup Showcase. And so people were actually starting to show off their products. And then last year, in 2017, October, this is where the rubber started to meet the road. Products were shipping, partnerships were happening. You know, Yumly got acquired by Whirlpool last year. So you actually started to see large companies making investments in this space, saying, okay, this is important, this is an area we need to invest in. Platforms started to coalesce and mature a little bit. And so as I look towards 2018, I started to think about, okay, where's the direction we want to go editorially and the conversations we want to have at the Smart Kitchen Summit and at the Spoon. What do we want to look at? I think a lot of it's going to be about sustainable business models and having those conversations about how you build a business. And so when I started to think about this panel here and who I wanted, I thought I want to get some folks up here who are building interesting businesses and doing things a little bit different and probably have some lessons that they can convey some knowledge from. And that's what we have assembled this panel here. We have Mike Wallace, who is Perfect Company, doing amazing things with data and interesting things. We have David Robbie from Tavala doing a subscription food service with a smart oven. And then we have John Jenkins over at Heston Q. Really the first company that I saw was doing guided cooking. 2 years ago I saw this guided cooking platform. I was fascinated by it. So they're gonna talk about it. They're gonna each give 10-minute presentations. Then at the end we're gonna do some Q&A. So start thinking of some questions as these guys are talking that you can ask them, because they're really smart guys. So we're gonna hand it over to Mike Wallace, who's gonna present first, and we'll go from there. Mike?
Am I on? Yes. Hello, everybody. Can we roll my, it's up, fantastic, thank you. So I'm Mike Wallace. I'm one of the founders of Perfect Company. This is actually our 4th year in a row to attend the show. So the company's been in business over 5 years now, so we're relatively old age compared to some of the tech food companies. So I'm gonna go to the video. Fantastic. So this was our first product that we launched with. It's called Perfect Drink. And, oh, it even has audio. You don't have to play the audio if you don't want to. And I'm going to tell you the sort of the background and backdrop of the story and how it became a platform. So I originally came from the toy business. For 10 years, my company was a toy inventing company. We came up with products, we'd license them with toy companies, make royalties, help them manufacture in China. 5 years ago, I was at the Hong Kong Toy Fair. My partner and I were sitting there brainstorming, drinking lychee martinis, and we'd never been able to make a good lychee martini at home, and we came up with this idea. What if we took a scale, connected it, we had an app, and it told us what to pour? We could never make a bad drink. Well, called the guys back home. 2 weeks later, we'd hacked a kitchen scale, connected it to an iPad that made 4 drinks. We cold called Brookstone, flew in, walked in with a box of booze, and an hour later we walked out with an order for 50,000 units, and that's how we started the company. And at the time, we didn't really know, we were just thinking of this as a product. But over the last 5 years, we've built this into an entire software platform for interactive recipes. And Cocktail was a great example. We've sold hundreds of thousands of these. And this is a platform where we can push recipes to users. Users can create their own recipes and share them. And then we anonymously collect data on every pour for every recipe. So we're the only source of in-home spirit consumption in the world. And it's fascinating. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today because these guys are all going to talk about different things. I'm going to talk a little bit about, we've invested heavily in data analytics, so all our partners can sort of learn deep marketing trends and even have a way of engaging directly with specific customers based on what they like to do. And this is the story I'm going to tell you of the Moscow Mule. So when we launched, the most popular drink in the country was the Malibu Bay Breeze. But what happened is there was about 2014 and up, there's been this constant rise in vodka consumption over the other spirits for cocktail drinkers. And you can see the rise of the popularity in vodka there. And this is all based on our data. What's interesting as well, if you look at the green line down below, that's rum. Well, if you look at POS data, rum is actually at the bottom. But for cocktail drinkers, people who actually make cocktails at home, rum's the second most popular spirit, which was a revelation to a lot of spirit companies. And then here, we see the ascendancy of the Moscow Mule as it overtakes really the margarita as the most popular cocktail made at home. And this is about, what, 2015 when that happened? And this is a really interesting trend. And I don't know if a lot of you know the history of the Moscow Mule. The Moscow Mule was invented to market vodka in this country. It is actually the drink that made vodka popular in this country originally. And it keeps coming back occasionally over and over again. So just to sort of show you how our data seems to map to other sources, this is Google search trends for Moscow Mule versus the Cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan was the most popular vodka drink in the country until, and you can see that Google search data basically maps very nicely to our consumer data. And we've tied this, we think, all the way back to an Oprah show that aired in 2011 when she made a Moscow Mule. And if you look, you can actually, if we look at our data geographically, you can see how it really started actually on the West Coast, LA, Southern California, and moved across the country from there over time. And then you can see really in 2017 last year, the Moscow Mule appears to have peaked and is starting to go down slightly. And if we look at all our geographical consumption data, the Moscow Mule is still the most popular drink in the country with the exception of New York. New York, the #1 drink for the last 5 years has been the Cosmopolitan. Okay, so what is it we could learn about the Moscow Mule and other popular drinks that are in the top, say our top 20? What we know is if we look across gender and all other types of age groups, demographics, there is a proportion of alcohol in the drink that makes these drinks popular. So if it's a really spirit-forward drink, it tends to not make it into that group. And if there's not enough alcohol, then people just don't get happy enough, and it's not popular either. Let's go to the next one. So here is the mojito. And this is actually an aggregate of all the mojitos made with our system. And this is across user recipes as well as our built-in recipes. And I should talk about that for a minute. So this year we've hit literally, I think, over 60,000 user recipes have been made with our system that people make. And most of those spirit names are after body parts, but some of them are legit like this mojito. And you can see this mojito is in the 25 to 30% alcohol range, which is one of the reasons it's a very popular drink. Gin and tonic, same thing, about 27%. And I should talk about two-component drinks, which is very important. Most people who make cocktails at home don't have a huge collection of things to mix with. And so having two-part recipes where it's a base spirit and something you mix with is incredibly important for people. They get it home, they want to make something immediately, they don't have, 10 bottles. So having a lot of simple two-component drinks was absolutely critical. Also, two-component drinks are the ones that are usually made the worst. So measuring them is actually the most important. Margarita, same thing. It's right in that 25 to 30% range. And the margarita, by the way, over the last 3 years has been the #1 drink on premises. This means in restaurants. So for cocktails made in restaurants, the margarita is absolutely #1. One of our favorite things to do when we walk in to a large spirit company is we ask them what the #1 cocktail made at home is, and they'll all tell us margarita because that's what Nielsen's data tells them. But the reality is it's the Moscow Mule. And then here's the Moscow Mule. And what's interesting about the Cosmopolitan is you can see it's almost 50% alcohol. It's a much stronger drink, which is fascinating to me because it bucks the trend. It's really an outlier in the whole top 10. Okay, now we're going to talk about a few drinks. This is a mango margarita. It really doesn't matter. Tequila is a really interesting category, and there's one day a year with Cinco de Mayo where everybody's drinking habits change. For the most part, the rest of the year, when you look at data, everybody's drinking habits are very much their own. But when it comes time to drink a margarita, nearly the entire country starts making them that week, which is fascinating. Okay. This is actually a blue cocktail we made for Best Buy. But the story here is one of the things we track, or that the app allows you to do, is you can put everything you have in your liquor cabinet into the app, and it'll tell you what you can make. And what's fascinating is 8 out of 10 people own a bottle of blue curacao, but they don't know what to do with it. So blue drinks are really appealing to people. And I think it's just fascinating that there's a bottle of blue stuff in almost everybody's cabinet. All right, this is a placeholder. This is the Long Island iced tea category. This is called a Tokyo iced tea. That really doesn't matter. There's a lot of variations on this. Long Island iced tea is well beyond the 25 to 30% alcohol range. It's almost all alcohol. What's fascinating about that is when you look at the demographic for Long Island iced tea consumption, people who drink Long Island iced teas, what breaks out is they're male, they went to college, but they never finished college. That's the biggest sort of data item I have for Long Island iced tea. It continues to be really popular. There's a Jeffrey Morgenthaler reinvention of this that's quite good. And then this is the Malibu Bay Breeze. This was the #1 spirit, cocktail consumed at home 5 years ago when we started. It's a very fruity drink, uses Malibu rum, coconut-based. Still very popular. And then this is a really fascinating story. So this is a drink nobody's heard of. It's called the Rainbow Delight. When Brookstone, that's the original Brookstone scale down there too. When Brookstone launched our product, we white labeled it. It was branded Brookstone. They chose for the front of the box this multicolored drink that nobody had heard of because it kind of told our story of adding the different ingredients. We thought it was a horrible drink, so we didn't put the recipe in the app. And that first year, we got so many angry calls. People were buying the product to make that drink. So we put that in, and it's really amazing because it no longer lives on the top of the box, on the front of the box, but it's always in our top 10. This drink, just because of the way it looks, and people feel like they can be successful now making cocktails, because it's a little complicated. A ton of people make this drink. So that's Perfect Drink. We started in the Perfect Drink route, really to prove out the platform, and we've been developing all kinds of new products. There's Perfect Bake, which we premiered here at the show, I believe the first year we were here at the Houseware show. Baking by weight, very important. And then 2 years ago, we partnered with Vitamix. So Vitamix actually has a Vitamix version of our scale and an app for making recipes. And what Vitamix will tell you, and they're absolutely right, if you can get somebody to make something other than a smoothie, they engage with the product and they become an ambassador of the brand. And now Vitamix demos this scale and our app at all 40,000 live demonstrations that they do around the country. And then our last product, which was really just announced last year at the Smart Kitchen Summit, is we partnered with NutriBullet, and we actually integrated our technology into the NutriBullet. So it's a connected blender, it has a scale built in, and it's made to be a smoothie machine where you can track all of your nutrition, you know exactly what's going in, you can remember it, and the TV for that is in test right now, should launch soon. So this is really a direction the company's going, and all of those analytics, all that analysis capability, we're bringing to each of these platforms, which I think is going to be fascinating.
Thank you. That it?
Yeah, I went a little too long.
We're going to ask you some questions afterwards.
Yeah, great.
So, Dave,
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. I don't know what it says. Oh, okay. Don't know what it says about me, but I don't even know what a Malibu Bay Breeze is. Okay. So my name is David Raby. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tovala. We're a Chicago-based company, actually, just here in the West Loop, 4 or 5 miles from here. I'm going to tell the story of eating at home and how we've gotten to the point where we are today. Before I do that, though, I'm going to give you a quick background on our company. Mike teed us up. We're really in two businesses. So we belong at the Houseware Show, but we also belong at a show like the Fancy Food Show or Expo West. We make a smart countertop oven. The oven can steam, it can bake, it can broil, it toasts bread, it reheats food. And then we also have a meal service that goes with that oven. So we prepare meals on a weekly basis that are made to be cooked in that oven. The way it works is pretty simple. You buy the oven on our website, subscribe to our meal service. Every week you get to choose from 7 options. Meals get delivered right to your doorstep. So take our miso glazed salmon, for example. You get a fresh piece of salmon delivered to you. You get a bed of brown rice. You get some broccoli on top of it. You get some sauces to put on top, so you add miso glaze to your salmon, you add lemon and olive oil to your broccoli, put your meal into the oven, you scan a barcode. The oven is Wi-Fi connected, so it downloads the recipe from the cloud, and then 13 minutes later, you've got a fresh cooked meal for 1 to 2 people. Every recipe has multiple steps, so it might steam for a little bit, then it might bake, then it might broil. The idea is that it replaces multiple appliances, and that you as a customer don't have to do anything beyond scanning a barcode and pushing start. We launched in July of last year, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we're available online right now. The product is $199 for the oven or $12 for the meal. But I'm not here to talk about Tovala. I could talk about us for hours. I'm here to talk about why our business model makes sense today. And I think a great way to tee it up is to talk about the way Phil Libin, who's a great investor and entrepreneur, the guy who started Evernote, says that every pitch that an entrepreneur gives should answer 3 questions. Number 1 is why you? Number 2 is why this? And number 3 is why now? I could spend all day talking about myself, but we're going to focus on why now. Why is now the right time for a connected appliance that's paired with a fresh food meal delivery service? So we're going to skip the first 50,000 years of human history, move to the early 1900s and the creation of the grocery store. What that allowed was for people to go to one place to buy lots of ingredients. It was a great idea, so lots of grocery stores were built over the first half of the 20th century. Let's skip ahead to the middle of the century, and over the course of a few decades, there were a couple key innovations in the appliance space, particularly as it relates to eating in the home. First was the refrigerator. The refrigerator was created and saw mass adoption within a matter of decades. That allowed people to store food for a long period of time. The second was the microwave. Similarly went from very low adoption to almost 100% adoption by the late 80s. And what the microwave did was allowed people to reheat food at the touch of a button and also cook meals at the touch of a button, and enabled a product like TV dinners to become very, very popular. While this was all happening, there were a lot of macro forces. One in particular that's relevant to this is more and more women entered the workforce. And so there was less time to cook at home and more of a need for convenient solutions to dinner. Let's skip ahead a few decades, and a natural rebellion or contrast to all of these packaged foods and the microwave was a small movement that began as Whole Foods in the early 80s for people that wanted to eat fresh, people that wanted to eat organic, people that wanted healthy, clean ingredients. And Whole Foods was the first manifestation of that, and it slowly grew over time. And then on the tech side, Nespresso was the first company to take the model that Gillette had built of selling a physical good and a consumable to go with it, but bring it to the appliance space. I was also surprised to realize that Nespresso actually was the first to market, and they beat Keurig to market by about 10 years. Might be because I'm America-centric, but Nespresso launched in Europe and was only espresso focused for a period of time, but was a precursor to many companies like us today that sell a physical good and food or beverage to go along with it. Let's skip to the 90s, and that was when Keurig first started. This is when the internet really started to take off, and if people could order pet food and books through the internet, why not food? And so Webvan burned through hundreds of millions of dollars. They weren't able to quite figure it out, but they laid the groundwork for future companies to figure out how do you deliver fresh food to people's doorsteps and keep them from going to the grocery store. And on the food side, health became a bigger and bigger topic, and diets became a bigger topic than they had in the decades prior. Move to the 2000s, smartphones started to happen, and really that enabled laziness on a level that humanity had never seen and got us accustomed to getting things at the touch of a button. Grubhub took advantage of that and reshaped the way we think about food delivery in the home. And many other companies, not related to food, really started to create this behavior that we expect things to happen very, very easily, and we expect a very, very high caliber of product. On the food side, you saw things like farm to table, organic, paleo enter the lexicon and become more and more commonplace. And Whole Foods became a massive company. People's expectations of fresh ingredients and fresh produce grew faster and faster. Now move to the 2010s. And something very interesting happened in the hardware space. For many decades, building hardware was something that was really confined to massive companies that had huge budgets. And this changed because the cost of goods to build, particularly connected appliances, came down significantly. And China opened up as a market for small US startups to go and manufacture products quickly and cheaply in a way that didn't exist before. And Nest was the first company to really take advantage and become a household name within the smart home and smart connected device category. And then in the food side, sous vide appliances were the first to really take advantage and take technology that had been in the commercial space, that had been very expensive, bring it to the home, make it connected, and sell it for low hundreds of dollars. Now you see many other companies kind of following that path. So move forward a little bit more, and you start to see tech and food come together in a way that they hadn't before. And lots of different companies sprouting up to solve problems for all different people. So people that don't like to shop, people that don't like to prep, people that don't like to cook, people that like to cook. All different kinds of companies solving problems for each of these different categories of people. Instacart took off where Webvan left off and is doing pretty well. And Blue Apron, everybody is familiar with, has created a new category for people that hate the planning, hate the shopping, but enjoy the cooking. So back to Phil's question of why now? Why is now the right time for a company like Tovala that has a connected hardware device and delivers fresh ingredients to your doorstep through the mail? There's really three reasons. The first is technology. Technology has advanced to a degree where we can build a connected device like that, and the costs have come down significantly where we can sell it for $199. The second is consumer demand. Expectations for fresh ingredients, healthy food, tasty food have skyrocketed. And the third are all these precursor companies that I talked about that have laid the groundwork for a company like ours to exist today. So where do we go from here? Mike's Smart Kitchen Summit started 4 years ago, 3 years ago. We're really just at the beginning of the intersection of food and technology. All of these companies are fairly new in the space, and you can just now see all of the major companies are really starting to pay attention and either invest in companies or purchase them outright. I think we're going to come to a point where the intersection is going to be complete in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And ultimately, I'll go back to the title of this deck, there will be multiple winners, just like there are today. There will be multiple appliance companies, there will be multiple food companies that win, but the ones that are the most convenient, without sacrificing quality, without sacrificing health, are going to be the ones that truly win. Let's hope Tovala is one of them. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
All right, my name is John Jenkins. Everyone calls me JJ, so you can just call me JJ if you want to ask questions. I work at a company called Heston Q. We have a booth over in the South Hall, and we make this thing. This is the Heston Q. It's a smart piece of cookware that uses Bluetooth to talk to a smart induction burner to control the temperature of the pan. The whole thing is controlled by an app that has a bunch of recipes that know exactly what temperature and how to go about making various meals. Now, I've spent most of my life working on software. I worked at Amazon for about 10 years. I worked at Pinterest for a couple years. And at Heston Q, I spend most of my time working on hardware. And so today I want to sort of tell you a little story in 5 acts. And given that I work on hardware mostly at Heston Q, you might think that I'm going to talk to you about how great hardware is in the smart kitchen. Well, prepare to be surprised, because Act 1 is that hardware is a distraction. This video from 1956 was made by Frigidaire to show you what the vision of the kitchen of the future will be.
No need for the bride to feel tragic. The rest is push-button magic. So whether you bake or broil or stew, the Frigidaire kitchen does it all for you. Don't have to be chained to the stove all day. Just set the timer and you're on your way.
So I'm guessing many of you don't cook in a kitchen that looks like that at home now. So these visions of the kitchen of the future never seem to pan out. And I would argue that the reason that they don't pan out is that all of these visions of the future focus almost purely on the hardware in the kitchen. And so here we are more than 60 years later after that video was made, and we still focus on hardware almost exclusively. There's all kinds of snazzy devices that do all kinds of nifty things, but we tend to think of these things as devices only. And if you look at the sous vide circulator, it's a great example of this. In the last 10 years, the typical sous vide circulator has become a commodity item. You can now buy one in the US for well under $100, and if you know where to shop in China, you can get one for 50 bucks or less. And what you start to realize with these is that there's very little differentiation between any of these products. And when you have a hardware product that's not differentiated, there's no way for your company to survive. It becomes a race to the bottom, and the cheapest one will win in the long run. Now, people try to shoehorn software sort of value propositions into these types of products, but consumers are pretty smart and they see through this. If the only reason the software is in your product is to sell you a specific type of coffee pod or a specific type of juice bag, customers are smart enough to see that that's not a real software value proposition. It's just DRM in another form. So fake software value propositions are not enough to carry a hardware product into the future and to make a company successful. Now, I will say that there's one caveat. Sometimes hardware is necessary to enable a different type of software business model. For example, at Heston Q, if we didn't have a temperature sensing pan, we wouldn't be able to go write software that did neat things with temperature. So hardware can be an enabler, but hardware in and of itself is not enough to build a sustainable smart kitchen business model. Which brings us to Act 2. It's all about the software. So I'd like to introduce you to this guy. His name's Mark Andreessen, and in 1994, he co-founded a company at the age of 23 called Netscape. That company went on to basically define the modern web as we know it. And in 2011, in the Wall Street Journal, Mark Andreessen said something that's turned out to be really important. He said, "Software is eating the world." Now, what he meant by this is that business models are being transformed right now. Traditional companies are using software, cloud-based services, et cetera, to completely rethink the way business is done. Examples abound. If you look at things like Amazon doing away with borders, Netflix doing away with things like Blockbuster Video, iTunes doing away with Tower Records, these software models are doing away with what have been traditionally very successful online businesses. But because we're not all computer scientists in this room, I want to make sure that we all have a baseline of what software is. Software is simply a set of machine instructions that get executed on a piece of hardware to perform a task. To use a sort of simple example, software takes inputs, applies a process to those inputs, and produces outputs. Typically with software, when you give it the same inputs, you would expect the same outputs. For example, 1 + 1 should always equal 2, and if that doesn't happen, you probably have a bug in your software. So how will software eat the kitchen? It's an interesting question that I spend a lot of time thinking about at our company since we're spending most of our time working on software. Which brings us to Act 3. Recipes are the software of the kitchen. If you think about a recipe and what we do in the kitchen, you take a set of inputs, which are raw ingredients, you apply a process to them, a recipe, and you get outputs, right? A fully cooked meal. It's basically a very similar process to any other sort of software problem that you might encounter. Now, you would think then that you should be able to take the same inputs, just like we do with math, and get the same outputs. So let's take a look at an example. This is a recipe from allrecipes.com called grilled salmon number 1. It's got 3,290 reviews, 5 stars. So you would think if there's a good example of a recipe that enables people to create a specific meal, this would be it. And so this recipe is supposed to enable you to make that picture that you see on the right there. Well, let's see how well it does by taking a look at some of the pictures people posted of their cooking of this recipe on All Recipes. They were trying to get that thing on the right, but instead they got this, or that, or this, and even that. Now remember, they were trying to create this thing here on the right, but instead you get this, or this, or this, or even this. So if I hadn't told you that those were attempts to create this recipe, I think you might never have guessed that that was an attempt to make grilled salmon number 1. And in fact, I think if we could taste the food, smell it, and touch it, the differences would be even more poignant, that they weren't actually very successful in recreating this meal. But in the restaurant world, people are successful all the time at recreating meals. A bunch of our chefs are from Thomas Keller's Bouchon restaurant. These are pictures on Yelp of different diners who ate at Bouchon restaurant over a series of years, right? They all ordered the same meal, and you can see they got the same thing. So it's clearly possible to produce the same thing on a regular basis with high quality. But for some reason, our software is buggy. And the recipe as a piece of software, as we understand it today, is simply unable to produce the type of outcomes that users expect. Why is that? Well, let's take a look at an example from a very common American cookbook, right? Pan-fried or sautéed chicken, super simple recipe. Look at the section in yellow here. You're supposed to cook your chicken from 25 to 40 minutes, right? That's a 15-minute range. How would we ever expect an inexperienced home cook to be able to cook something reliably when we give them a 15-minute window that they're supposed to target? And don't even get me started on what words like brown mean or how tender is. So this brings us to Act 4, the recipe software business model. I know that it's possible to produce recipes reliably because our users are doing it every day. On the left, you see our recipe for beef and broccoli. On the right, you see a post of a user to Facebook when they tried to create it. Pretty darn close. Our recipe for chicken piccata on the left, the user's incarnation of that on the right. Again, pretty good. So the question is, how will software eat the kitchen? And I'd like to give you 2 quick examples of how I think that will happen. First, it will eliminate tasks that humans are bad at. Humans are terrible at managing systems with feedback loops. And controlling temperature in a stove or in a kitchen environment is a terrible feedback loop. When you adjust the knob on your stove, it takes some time for that to react. And humans are bad at anticipating this. But you know what's really good at anticipating it? Software is. Software is what keeps your home at the right temperature. It's what keeps your car from overheating. It's what keeps your refrigerator at the right temperature. And by having software take that drudgery of a task from the human and doing it instead, we can produce much better outcomes. A second way that software will eat the kitchen is it will personalize recipes and personalize the experience for users. Whether you want to try and personalize for flavor or doneness or whatever, software can help solve that problem. Here you see an example of where our app asks the user of how they want their steak done, or their salmon done. And in this case, it will automatically adjust the temperature and the time so that you get the outcome that you expect. But you can do the same thing for levels of saltiness or spiciness as well. And software is very good over time at learning based on your feedback how you would like a meal cooked. So let's talk about like what some of the realities of kitchen software are. When we think about business models and the future of kitchen software, we have to think about things differently than we do in traditional hardware models. The first thing that we have to grapple with is this notion of scale. If you're a traditional hardware manufacturer, you might think in traditional hardware terms. An appliance maker might think, oh, if I'm gonna make 2 stoves, it costs twice as much as making 1 stove, right? Or if I manufacture cookware, making 2 pans costs twice as much as making 1 pan. But that's not true with software. To make an app that's used by 1 person costs basically the same amount of money as making an app that's used by 1 million people. And so there's a tremendous fixed cost with software up front. The same is true of a recipe. When our chefs create a recipe, if 1 person cooks it, it costs exactly the same amount for them to create it as if 1 million people cook it. And so we need to start thinking about scale and extending our products to larger groups of people. It's very, very difficult to build niche smart kitchen products because of the tremendous fixed costs associated with software. A second thing we need to think about is partnerships. It turns out, in general, hardware companies are not particularly good at building software, and software companies are not particularly adept at building hardware. If you want to build a product that combines those 2 things, you're far better off partnering in a way that each can bring their unique expertise. Our company, who primarily focuses on software, has a parent company that makes cookware, and we never would have figured out how to do that cookware had we not had a partner that we could have worked with. Similarly, there are many companies that make great heat sources, ovens, ranges, etc., and working with them rather than trying to recreate what they do is a far more successful strategy. A third thing that we need to think about is testing. When creating something like completely new, we often don't know what it is that will be successful. And it becomes very important to do A/B tests and to learn from data in order to produce the right product for consumers. We seldom will get things right on the first try. And then finally, it's really important that we think about iteration. Nothing will get done right on the first time. You will not have enough time to release the product the way you would like the first time through. And so it's important to continuously update the Smart Kitchen product over time. Users expect their Smart Kitchen products to get better and better, not to be stagnant. And this is very different from the way we think about hardware. So in conclusion, software will eat the kitchen. I have no doubt about it. Mark Andreessen's words have proven to be true in many other industries. And when you think about it, whether you're using a smart cocktail measuring system, a smart oven, or our system, when you're eating food made with these systems, you're actually eating software. Thanks.
Thanks, JJ. So as you can see, each one of these companies and each one of these individuals represented interesting takes on categories and different takes on categories than you probably would have seen before. A company that's helping make drinks, going deep into data. A company that's helping deliver, help you make food with their oven, actually delivering food to your door using a subscription meal plan type of scenario. And then lastly, taking a large and well-known cookware company, Meijer, and adding software capabilities to that. JJ, looks like you have your mic on, so I actually want to start with you. You do come from this established company, Meijer. You have a founder who helped kind of create a category in kind of nonstick cookware. But he was a guy who looked and said, I want to invest in software and technology. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think a lot of houseware companies probably have similar scenarios where they have an executive who's built a business, but then ultimately they're looking at this and looking at what you guys are talking about and then thinking, do I need to transition and invest in technology? Talk a little bit about his thinking process as you know it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, our sort of corporate parent and its owner, Stanley Cheng, is an incredibly innovative guy. Like, he's the president of the company, but would much rather spend his time, I think, innovating in the factory or in the lab than anything else. And in many areas of the housewares industry, there hasn't been a lot of innovation in many ways. You know, the colors change every year, but that's kind of it. And so Stanley really wanted to do something fundamentally different. And even though the company didn't have a lot of experience in software, he was, I think, cognizant enough of what was going on in the market to look out at other small companies. And we were a small company that they acquired at the time to bring that capability in-house. And so
I think it's a lot of times this expertise may not be in-house, and so you see these companies sort of acquiring or seeking out the talent or partnerships elsewhere in order to get to sort of that future vision.
So you talk about how this competency may not be in-house. Mike, you went and had that meeting with this company. You brought in a bag of booze. That probably helped the meeting, by the way, bringing booze to the meeting. And I can imagine maybe a guy in the room across the table who maybe we all know the guy who's resistant. He's like the curmudgeonly guy who's been doing it the same way for 20 years, his whole career. And someone comes in and say, hey, we can do data. You can know what people are drinking in their home. And have you encountered these skeptics, or how do you convince them? What do you say to these guys to say, hey, you do need to evolve your business a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, I encounter them daily, and they're everywhere. And it is the dichotomy of our business is we move very fast. We innovate very quickly, and they typically have businesses that change, over a 5-year period of time. And so, it literally is a tortoise in the hare. You're sitting here trying to get them to buy, but honestly, in the end, we try to show them our success. We launched our platform ourselves to first and market it directly just to show that it would work and people like to do this before we started any of those conversations. So that helps, walking in with some history. But in the end, honestly, more than anything else, it literally is a little bit of a dating where you go in and you choose a small project and you do something really fast and you innovate and make something really quickly in front of them. Most of the products that we've shown to people, we've literally built prototypes in a few weeks. The NutriBult's a perfect example. They actually sent us a bunch of their blenders and said, what would you do? We've been thinking about it. No kidding, 2 weeks later we walked in with that blender with the scale integrated. And so for us, because we are a hardware development company too, we have a little bit of an advantage there, as we can go in if that's part of the play. But in the end, it's really showing them how fast they can make changes, because we're talking about software-centric products in the end. One of the big things to think about here is once you make software really integrated with your product, the feature set becomes very dynamic and changeable over time. And that piece of hardware now can change. You can change the way people use it, which is an incredible advantage over past sort of appliance models.
David, you showed the Nespresso picture there, and it's interesting. Tyson invested in you guys, and you are this company that makes hardware that also you do meal. You're kind of like this hybrid model, and so Tyson, in a way, investing in a cooking company like with a piece of hardware. It's really fascinating to me. So as I think about a company like you, and I think about bigger companies who maybe just make hardware and housewares, you probably have some ideas about should they start to think about maybe do I want to do a food product? Talk about like where maybe this industry is going. Do companies like these established companies need to start thinking about I need to sell maybe food as well? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think they're all thinking about it, but to Mike's point, I think they're also starting to realize that there are certain things they can't do. Yeah. So actually, John said it, that a lot of these hardware companies can't build software. They don't do it very well. I think they now realize that very clearly. And they're clearly never going to become food companies. So a lot of them have interest in working with us. I think there are pure play food companies that are looking to work closer with appliance companies. But I think for the most part, the major appliance guys see the writing on the wall that they're going to have to get closer integrated with the food side of things, and they probably can't do it themselves. So they're looking at other companies to kind of partner with or purchase to show them how to do it.
So I would imagine all you guys are having these conversations because in one way or another, you're either within a bigger company or you're having conversations with larger companies that are saying, hey, we need to move forward. We need to either partner, we need to acquire, or we need to invest. And so, I would love to hear some examples of some of these conversations and maybe the different kind of archetypes you're seeing within these larger companies. Can you talk a little bit about some of these experiences, Mike?
Yeah, well, the biggest challenge for us over the last 5 years in talking with appliance companies is they all want to have an exclusivity. They want to have an exclusive position. They want to own what you do, but they never want to pay for it. And really, it's an old way of thinking that to move fast in this business, you really have to partner and not own. Acquisition is definitely one model for that, which is fantastic if you find a company that does that. But a lot of companies really get stuck on, I have to have an exclusive, you can't work with anybody else, and that's not sustainable for us.
So it's probably a clash of approaches.
Yeah.
As opposed to like.
It's the perfect story about Toys R Us when they started working with Amazon. They wanted the exclusive toy position in Amazon and missed out on the entire online sale for toys because of that. Whereas they just partnered and moved ahead and not worried about other online retailers, they could have had this massive position.
We all know that Toys R Us has been hugely successful since then, right? And they haven't gone out of business.
Yeah, right.
So tell us a little bit about, I think looking forward, if you were to give some advice, any one of you guys, to an established housewares brand or even like a startup, what are like some of the key things that they need to think about to kind of make themselves, ensure that they're relevant 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road?
I was telling these guys about Tyson earlier. I think Tyson has the right mentality behind, they started this venture fund like just over a year ago, and it has real push from the entire corporation. So it's not just a small little corner piece of their business, but it's something that the larger corporation believes in, that they need to invest in. Otherwise, they're going to get overtaken by startups that they're not, working with. And I think having that mentality of, we know the future is coming, we know we need to change, we know we need to innovate, and we're going to put real money and resources behind it is what companies need to do. I think Tyson is just a very good example of that.
I think the other thing I would point out is that this is not a zero-sum game. Like, we're coming up with new businesses, right? This is not, I'm trading off electric range sales against my competitor, right? These are entirely new revenue streams and new business models that are additive to the existing business. And so the opportunity to partner can really get you there a lot faster, can help you learn a lot faster, and can make large companies make sure that they don't miss out on this, which they would otherwise do.
I do want to say, if you guys have questions, we do want to have some time for the audience to ask questions. So we do have those microphones on, I think, both sides. So as you start to have those, start walking up now, and we can go to you guys. So I want to talk a little bit about data. So you guys, Mike, you work with some of these big alcohol companies.
Yeah.
And like you said, you're the first company that has probably provided them like real views into the kitchen and what's being consumed at the bar. I would imagine this is a revelation for some of them.
It is. It's a revelation, but they also don't know what to do with it. So they're very much tied to POS. They're swimming in a sea of POS data. They know when somebody buys a bottle, and they know when they come back and buy another bottle, and they have no idea what happens in between. And so you give them this wealth of data on per city, per major market, what people are doing, what they drink and when, on what occasions. And there's still, we've been talking to them now for 3 years, and I think we're about to have a major partnership. Big Spirit has really struggled to have an effective mobile strategy. Even social is not a giant marketing success for Spirit. And so we're hoping to change that a bit, and so business insight is really, what we bring with every one of our partners when we've integrated. We've brought this wealth of data, and honestly, they're still just sort of trying to figure out how to consume it and use it. And one of the things we're doing going forward is building a platform to help with that. So the recipe platform in the end can also become the very targeted marketing engagement platform. And I think that's something else we're going to see, is going from mass marketing to one-to-one marketing over time because of it.
And I think when you look at related industries like television, they kind of went from like these survey-based information streams to like real consumption as we went to the Netflix world. I think we're going to see a similar type of scenario with food over time.
It is, and it's remarkable how you can influence behavior. And the perfect example is that Rainbow Delight. I mean, we didn't see that coming, but literally just putting that on the box or putting that in the app had top 10 drinks, across the country. That's a remarkable piece of information. To be able to go in with a piece of content and actually influence behavior across the entire country is remarkable.
I think an important thing to think of as we think about the data streams is not only the value to the businesses that we work with, but we need to be providing value to customers with the data as well. So not only can you do neat things for spirits providers, but now you have a body of data that you can do cocktail recommendations to people.
Exactly.
And so really thinking about it from the customer perspective, how can we make sure that we're making the food the way you want it, the doneness, the saltiness, whatever, is really important with the data story, is to keep the customer in mind there.
And also, just from a straightforward marketing perspective, like if you do like a promotion around Cinco de Mayo, and the tequila company can see how big the spike was based on a certain advertising and doing A/B testing, I imagine that's hugely valuable. So, in terms of like David, in terms of like talking to a company like Tyson, and like they've been doing some interesting investments. They did some alternative meat investments. You were really the first, I think, smart kitchen investment for them. Talk a little bit about that conversation. I think that's a fascinating deal, and how that came together.
Yeah, so they have 3 different pillars that they're investing under, and one of them, I believe, is the Internet of Food, and it's purposely broad and purposely vague. And I think part of what, I think a few things kind of led to them investing in us. One was pure geography, so their venture team is based here, and that made things a lot easier. They knew about us, they knew a lot of our investors, and so we met very early on. And 2, I think, to Mike's point, they're thinking about data, and they're thinking about how do we get ahead of what's coming in the kitchen. And similar to the beverage companies, if someone goes to buy a Tyson product at the grocery store, Tyson doesn't know what happens to that after that point. So they don't know who cooks it, how they felt about cooking it, when they go back to buy another one. The only way they can get that data today is really through surveys and focus groups and things like that. And we kind of see a world where we can give them much more accurate data and say, hey, John in South Carolina cooked your Tyson nuggets. Here's what he thought about them, and here's when he went to buy another one. And so I think that's one of the ways they see working with us fit within the Tyson ecosystem. But I think there are others as well, and it is interesting to think about them investing in an appliance company. But we are as much a food company as we are an appliance company, so it fit neatly within their investment thesis.
I think one of the things you always hear about with like the car model is once you drive the car off the lot, it drops like $2,000 to $3,000 in value. And I think it's probably a similar type of scenario with like housewares or home electrics. Like you bring it home, like unless you return it, you're not going to get the same value. You can't sell that. But I think what I think is interesting about potentially software-driven and connectivity-driven electronics models and smart home models is you can start to reverse that amortization curve and or at least flatten it out much more quickly. So talk a little bit about the changing relationship with the consumer, because the products that are software driven can get better over time, and you have a more persistent and continuous relationship with the consumer. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely agree with that. So, like, think about a traditional piece of cookware that you might have bought a few years ago, right? You take it home, it slowly gets scratched, or the nonstick coating wears off until it becomes useless. Our product's really very different, right? You might have bought it last year when we had 250 recipes, and maybe that made you happy, right? Well, by the end of this year, it's going to have 750 recipes, and you had to pay no additional money for that additional value that you're getting. Similarly, through small software updates, we can add entirely new capabilities to the system over time. And I think that's what people expect from smart kitchen devices. They are supposed to get better over time. And that's a really big departure from the way traditional housewares and appliance manufacturers have thought, right? It's just like sell the thing, collect the revenue, wait till it needs to be replaced. And you need to change that mindset really in the smart kitchen.
No,
But go ahead, Mike.
yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I know on our platform we've spent over $12 million now developing over the last 5 years. And it's really hard for a hardware company, an appliance company, to make that investment. But it really does start to pay out over time. And I think the most complete integration we've done is really for NutriBullet, where their entire online CMS recipe development system is completely linked to the app for the NutriBullet blender. So they can develop new recipes, they can look at data, develop new recipes, and they can literally push them to the app anytime they want to. And so they have this complete link going all the way through, and it's kind of a game changer for them.
Yeah, and I think John's point is a great one, that software is going to be the way that we really differentiate, because ultimately most hardware in the kitchen is a commodity, or it will become a commodity. So the only way to differentiate yourself will be through software.
To play devil's advocate a little bit, so I mean, you talked a little bit about like you started getting all these complaints. It's a little more of a packaging issue. They had that certain colorful drink, but I would imagine there are some maybe downsides, right, to trying to transition your company to like a software-driven model or connected model.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the biggest problem is really age. We have a transition. We have transitional generations. So my mother's 75. She is really excited to do smart cooking and use her her Echo and everything else, and she struggles with all of it, right? And so we tested on QVC, which is another very much older demographic market, and selling smart stuff to that market is much more challenging. And so you have this huge gap of people, younger 20, 30 somethings that have used technology most of their lives, and then you have these older, generational who are huge fans of the technology but struggle with it. And so the real challenge for an appliance company is now customer service is really much more challenging, because you have all kinds of different questions coming in you never had to field before.
I gave my mom, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's an interesting point. We have a lot of customers that are around your mom's age, and it's people like you that buy them for their parents, and it's the kids that have to go install the device, get it ready. And then, at least for us, our core customer behavior is so simple that once it's installed, it's a pretty simple process, but getting it installed and then even placing their orders for their meals on a weekly basis, it's a challenge, because they didn't grow up with the technology the way the generation after them did.
I think the customer service, which you brought up, is the really fascinating part of this. Think about a combined product, right, where it may be one brand's cookware, another brand's appliance that it's cooking on, and someone else's app that's controlling the whole thing. Well, who does the user call when something doesn't go right, or who do they reach out to? And how does that sort of resolve itself behind the scenes? Do those companies work together? This is a really interesting question, I think, as these types of products come forward, to figure out how to make that user experience is really awesome. My time at Amazon taught me that it doesn't matter if you're buying from a third-party merchant on Amazon. People are going to blame Amazon. That's whose fault it is when your stuff doesn't arrive. And so there's no gamesmanship you can play and say, oh, this isn't really our issue, it's the other partner's issue. You have to be on the hook to resolve it and figure out how to make that
Who do
good.
people call? Do they call you or NutriBullet?
Yes.
And we're kind of in that awkward phase in the market where, like, you have a bunch of different companies with a bunch of different software. They're all kind of siloed, and we were talking about this future vision of cross-interoperational. And when you cook a meal, like, you put it in a certain oven, you may prepare it in a blender, and these are all oftentimes different brands, and they may not work together. So we're kind of in that weird phase. I think we do have a question, so I want to make sure we get that. Go ahead.
Hi, I just have one question, because you guys are talking about in the future the best way a company can differentiate is through software, at least in your vision, whereas in hardware it's kind of like a little stagnant. So I was thinking of kind of like a NutriBullet and a Ninja. Like now it's really like, consumer goes to the store, they don't know which one, and just kind of like whichever maybe is a better price, or if they heard about one or whatever, but pretty much they're the same. So if, like, the amazing thing that you guys have done for NutriBullet in incorporating the software, if Ninja goes to someone else and incorporates the same similar software, how do you envision this in the future being able to differentiate if they can just go to another software company and pretty much show the same things on like similar app platforms?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's two things really that are at play there. One is we have an enormous patent portfolio. I think at this point we filed like 30 patents, and we have a number of them that are issued, and also worldwide. And so we protect our space very carefully, because let's face it, in the appliance industry and a lot of other industries, there's a lot of copy, right? Somebody innovates, everybody else copies. And so we definitely lay the IP groundwork wherever we go, and we invest heavily up front. And then the other really is, I think in the end, whoever's going to win there, because you're right, it's going to happen. But whoever has the best platform and the best experience over time, whoever invests the most in their software platform and doesn't do a Me Too app with a few recipes in it, is going to win. And that's the thing everybody, you know, you look on the floor here, you'll see a lot of appliances with almost Me Too copy apps with some recipes, but they haven't really made the big investment for the long term. And I think that's going to be a big differentiator over time.
I think that's a great answer, because now I'm thinking of it like a Facebook. There's not a lot of copies of that, or Instagram or Twitter. They really have that space. So
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
the other key thing I'd think about is you're only as good as your next feature, right? Like, you can't count on your existing product being the product that's going to keep you the leader in the market. Like, you have to have dozens, years of features that you plan to get out there in the future in order to maintain your leadership position. And so I think if you do that, then by the time someone copies you, you know, you'll already be 3 steps ahead
Exactly
at that point.
right.
And that's really an important aspect.
And some of these software applications also have network effects, which I think can help build a moat around them in a way that others can't.
Well, we're running close to time. I would suggest if you want to tap into these guys' knowledge and ask some questions, we'll have a few minutes. Just catch them at the side of the stage, exchange business cards if you want to do that. But I do want to thank you guys for spending some time presenting and telling us about your visions and answering some of my questions. Thanks, guys. Give me a round of applause.
Thank you.
Good job, guys.